Part of President Roosevelt's New Deal was the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1936, which primarily aimed to stabilize prices of various crops. The act made price supports for corn, cotton, and wheat to help maintain a sufficient supply in low production periods, along with marketing quotas to keep supply in line with market demand. It also established supports for butter, dates, figs, hops, turpentine, rosin, pecans, prunes, raisins, and many other things. While it was soon ruled unconstitutional, another Agricultural Adjustment Act was passed in 1938. Instead of the federal government funding the act with a tax on processors as it had before, the act would have to be funded with federal government spending. The goal of the act was to decrease crop surpluses by subsidizing farmers who voluntarily cut back on production. This did have drawbacks, however, as agribusinesses with large amounts of land benefited much more than other relatively small farmers. Another important note of the effects of such a policy is that while destroying crops and livestock, when done together, could help increase the purchasing power per crop for farmers, this meant more expensive food for everyone else. This was at a time when unemployment was high and many people were malnourished and hungry. It's also important to keep in mind that the Agricultural Adjustment Act did not end the Great Depression. The macroeconomy was largely still in the dumps, even if some farmers did gain from it. What this means is that farmers gained from the policy at the expense of society as a whole. As is often the case, this pit concentrated group interests against the social interest. Some long-term effects have also arisen from this policy due to its permanence. The 1938 Act is considered part of permanent law for commodity programs and farm income support and became the model for future farm bills. Although provisions of this law are often superseded by more current legislation, if the current legislation expires without new legislation being enacted, the law reverts to the permanent provisions of the 1938 Agricultural Adjustment Act.
Well, hello everybody. I'm Greg, and I'm going to be talking about the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NIRA. We're going to have a great time because the NIRA was a fun time. It was when Franklin Roosevelt took the whole country through a party and miraculously got us all working together and pulled us out of the Depression. Let's see how he did it. Now, the first problem that Roosevelt had to solve was, why are all these businesses having so much trouble? But our great savior was not afraid of stating the obvious. They were competing against each other, and competition makes it really, really hard. So Roosevelt stood up to these evil businesses. He formed cartels in every industry, and he mandated that every business join them whether it wants to or not. Now the problem was there were quite a few evil businesses that really didn't want to join these cartels, and it cost money to form the bureaucracy that would force them to do it. But Roosevelt managed to tax these very evil businesses to force these same businesses to join the cartels. Brilliant! Now that Roosevelt had shown them the way, these evil businesses had gotten a taste of a kinder, gentler world, where the cost of doing business was 40% higher. In fact, it looked like they'd really learned their lesson, because industrial production dropped 25% within 6 months, and it never got up to pre-NIRA levels until after the NIRA was declared unconstitutional in 1935. The NIRA was headed by General Hugh Johnson, also known as Iron Pants. Professor Lawrence Reed calls him a, quote, red-faced bully, but Time magazine liked him enough to make him Man of the Year. Then again, it also made Hitler Man of the Year, not to mention some other Men of the Year. Okay, that might seem like a really unfair and offensive comparison, but I'm not so sure General Johnson would actually mind it, given his admiration for Benito Mussolini. And in fact, the NIRA price regulations really remind a lot of people of policies in Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia, among others. May Almighty God have mercy on anyone who attempts to interfere with the Soviet duck, said Johnson. Okay, he said Blue Eagle, but we all know what he meant. Those who didn't cooperate with the Blue Eagle, he said, deserved, quote, a punch in the nose, and public boycotts. That same Time magazine that gave us all those Men of the Year tells us in an article in 1982 that codes from the NIRA covered everything from lightning rods to your bra. Professor Reed has a few other examples, like codes for the production of hair tonic, codes for the production of dog leashes, codes for the production of musical comedies. You know, I always thought that our world is going to crap because anybody can write any darn musical comedy that they want. What in the world is going on? And now I know that we have the 1935 Supreme Court to thank for that which struck down the NIRA. But hold on, we're not there yet. Now, anecdotal evidence is stupid, but it's powerful. So I want to bring in a little story that we've all heard little pieces of. Jacob Maged was exactly the kind of evil criminal that the NIRA was after. He was pressing suits for 35 cents when the price mandated by the New Jersey Tailors Code was 40 cents. For that, this father of four was sentenced to a $100 fine, about a month of his salary, and 30 days in jail, about another month of his salary. In court yesterday, the New York Times writes, he stood as if in a trance when sentence was pronounced. He hoped that it was a joke. Well, it kind of was a joke, because 3 days later, Maged was released from jail, his fine was remitted, and here's what the New York Times has to say. The judge gave him a little lecture on the importance of cooperation as opposed to individualism. The New York Times continues, saying that the judge then promised to have Maged measure him a new suit. And so Maged took down his 35-cent advertisement and put up the Blue Eagle. Oh, Roosevelt, our great hero who gave us our dignity. Of course, Maged wasn't the only criminal price cutter. Huge black markets sprang up, and police, the heroes of the NIRA, had to patrol the streets at night breaking down doors to make sure that our society was decent and safe and not sewing shirts at night. Franklin Roosevelt had given us a better society. A society where everyone cooperated. A society with order. A society where factory owners were pulled outside while their employees were lined up and questioned and while police rifled through the company books. A society where all our hair gel was up to code.
By the end of Roosevelt's first term, the Supreme Court had overturned the National Industrial Recovery Act and the Agricultural Adjustment Act, but unfortunately there would be more anti-competitive policies to come in the so-called Second New Deal. Roosevelt opposed the court's decision regarding the NIRA, saying that the fundamental purposes and principles of the NIRA are sound. To abandon them is unthinkable. It would spell the return to industrial and labor chaos, end quote. But as Leonard Read pointed out, the less burdened economy had actually begun to show signs of recovery. Unemployment was down to 18% in 1935 and down to 14% in 1936. But 2 months after the NIRA was overturned, FDR signed the National Labor Relations Act. This increased the power of labor unions by making it illegal for employees to refuse collective bargaining or to discriminate among employees on the basis of union affiliation. It also established the National Labor Relations Board, which was to take over the role of traditional courts in handling labor disputes. In just 4 years, union membership went from about 13% of employment to about 29%. Armed with new protections, union members became bolder in their strike tactics. The most powerful was the sit-in strike. With this approach, unionists halted production by sitting idle in the place of work, refusing to budge until the employer met all their demands. Roosevelt's general attitude towards business became increasingly negative. In what appeared to be a political attack on private property, he tried to raise the top marginal tax rate as high as 100%. Given the low level of private investment and high unemployment, these policies just added uncertainty to the economic situation and caused a depression within the depression. To sum up, the NLRA and other Second New Deal policies that made asset owners fearful may help answer the question of why the Great Depression lasted for so long.
The New Deal is the economic measures introduced by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 to counteract the effects of the Great Depression. As told through countless texts, the New Deal saved the United States from continuous turmoil caused from the Great Depression. With stern government policies on everything from job creations to public work projects, it seems as if this technique is the best solution to solve a major economic crisis. However, this did not save the United States, nor did it save its economy. The Work Progress Administration, created in 1933, was a work relief program that employed more than 8.5 million people. The program offered several different employment opportunities and allowed for many people to once again earn minimum wage of an average salary of $41.57 a month. Equal opportunities were given to men, women, African Americans, and young adults. These jobs were offered to mostly non-skilled workers who were satisfied with the idea of having a monthly paycheck for any labor they were offered. The government funding put in these jobs were also offered to skilled workers as well, but unlike their unskilled co-workers, were ashamed to be put on the same level as unskilled. Despite their discomfort, a variety of skilled workers joined the workforce, including artists, performers, educators, therapists, architects, and an abundance of several other professions. Contrary to popular belief, more government intervention does not even begin to scratch the surface to economic relief, but instead acts as a deficit. However, providing jobs for people is not the best solution because jobs don't produce wealth. Even if these jobs created 850 airports, 600,000 miles of roads, and 300 million articles of clothing, as they did with WPA, wealth was not created from this. It's important to remember that economic growth does not happen because jobs and produces are made. It's what comes out of those jobs and produces. If jobs are lost, then those skills, whether or not existent, are taken to places that are needed, assisting in the continuous development of a free market and thus stimulating the economy. Intervention and forcing jobs to be made in areas that are unneeded of jobs prevents market from operating and creating real wealth. Although these harms created from the WPA weren't noticed right away, controversy and criticisms existed. Many politicians were concerned for the amount of money put into funding this large program. They feared that large spending of money and resources were not going to be utilized in the best of their abilities. They also feared that not only was this excessive spending not going to help the economic depression, but also was going to be used to fund slacking workers. Many complained that the WPA workers had poor work habits and incorrect techniques. Sarcastic names were given to the WPA such as "we poke along," "we putter along," or "whistle, piss, and argue." In the end, these concerns and criticisms were proven true, and neither the WPA nor other New Deal programs helped end the Great Depression and in fact hinder its cessation.